Architectural Outcast.
Welcome to the Architectural Outcast, that little old channel from Texas. I want to talk to you all about power, specifically illusionary power, and how an entire generation of women in the architectural world have been convinced to abandon real power, all in an effort to chase after a very temporary and ultimately illusionary form of power. And it begs the question, who benefits from this con? Because it has been nothing but a con from the beginning. Power is all about good and evil. How you use power reveals if you are good or evil. We have to acknowledge, since time immemorial, there have always been people willing to use their positions of power to force others to do things against their will. The architectural world is no different. The architectural world is small. Everybody knows everybody, or at least you know somebody who knows somebody. There are always salacious rumors about what people are up to. All too often, people get caught doing those salacious things. And every now and then, there's a shocking scandal. A couple of examples of shocking scandals that involve two of my favorite architects. Frank Lloyd Wright had an affair with one of his clients' wives. She left her husband, and they ran off to Europe, where they hid out for about 10 years, waiting for the scandal to die down. Louis Kahn was the first professor at the University of Pennsylvania to allow women into his studio. He probably had an affair with one of those women. Check out the movie My Architect to see the consequences and ultimate tragedy of his behavior. I've attended and taught at two separate architecture programs. Based upon first-hand knowledge and stories that are commonly accepted to be true, roughly about half the faculty in both departments are doing things with people they have no business doing them with. There was one incident that royally pissed me off. Both parties lied to my face about what was going on. A professor was caught in the act, or you might say caught finishing the act, in his studio with one of his students by his wife. She immediately left and filed for divorce. Once the divorce was finalized, the professor and the student were married. It gets worse. The professor was the student's thesis chair. He determined if she would graduate or not. The university accepted his grade, gave her her diploma, and then hired her as a full-time instructor. You know those rules about faculty not supposed to be messing around with students? They ain't worth the paper they're written on. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This problem is not just confined to architectural education. When I was in grad school, our university brought in a world-famous architect who also taught an elite institution to give a presentation. When my friend and I walked into the auditorium and saw him for the first time, we both turned to each other and at the same time said, "What a piece of garbage." Ichibang. When asked my reason, I said, just look at his body language. The way he sits, the way he's looking at people. He's a predator. He's dangerous. My fight or flight instinct is being triggered just being in the room with him. I would never turn my back on him. When I asked my friend, she said, he's undressing every woman in the room with his eyes. When he looked at me, I felt a chill go up my spine. He's dangerous to women. He's a predator. After the presentation, I met up with the instructor I was TAing for. More on her in a bit. I asked her, did you go to the presentation? She had a hostile, almost visceral reaction. No, I have no interest in what he has to say. She said, I graduated from that university. I'm very familiar with him. Women don't get good grades in his studios unless they do certain things for him. He's worse with the interns and female architects in his firm. He doesn't take no for an answer. I asked, is it okay if I ask, did you have a problem with him? She sneered and said, no, he doesn't like blondes. But my best friend in college, my roommate, she punched him in the face. I was like, wow, he's that bad? She said, "The only reason why he's not in jail is the university protects him." I lay all this out to acknowledge that just like every other walk of life, architecture has a problem. It's a problem that any just society should do its best to fix, or at least to limit as much as possible. When I entered university in '98, over 40% of architecture students were women. When I left in 2016, over 65% of incoming freshmen were women. In the early 2000s through the teens, there was a massive shift in architectural faculty. They had become predominantly female. Sounds great, right? Women have taken over a profession that has been accused of historically excluding women. It's more complicated than that, but it is true that historically more men were architects than women. But great, right? They've taken over. Woohoo! No. Women in architecture's goose is cooked. They're done. Within a generation, they're going to be back to square one. Politics is downstream of culture, but culture is downstream of academia. When I arrived in 2006 to do my PhD, MeToo was already in full swing. It wasn't just about what you did. You could get in trouble for things that you said years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago. The person no longer needed to provide details. All they had to say was, "So-and-so said something that offended me back in '94. I demand redress." And the university? They were more than happy to provide that redress, usually by destroying somebody's life. Last couple years, we've seen the tragic consequences and the loss of moral authority of MeToo as it left the ivory tower and came into the real world. As horrible as that is, how can that affect all of women in architecture? Well, architecture is the last profession that still follows the Renaissance model of the master-student relationship, mentor and protege. Architecture is not a self-taught profession. The only way you learn to do architecture is by doing architecture while being guided by an experienced architect. It is part of our professional ethics that it is expected that once you reach a certain level of knowledge and experience, you're going to pass on that knowledge and experience to the next generation. Architecture has another wrinkle. It's the only art form that every time you express your creativity, you design, you run the risk of killing another human being. On average, every major construction project is insured for 2 workers' deaths. This is considered the best case scenario. You screw up, a lot more people can die. Look up Kansas City Hyatt Regency Hotel. If the protege screws up and a lot of people die, the mentor is morally responsible for those deaths. The mentor-protege relationship is built upon a foundation of implicit trust. No trust, no relationship. Y'all see where this is going? I wouldn't have gotten as far as I did in my career without my mentors. Remember that blonde instructor I mentioned earlier? She was trained by a world-class architect. She had just finished up a project where he'd made her lead designer. He'd announced, "It's time for you to go out on your own. Make a name for yourself." One of the first things she did was come back to the university to teach. I found out later that she'd requested me, by name, to be her TA. Never found out who it was, but somebody had put my name in her ear. First part of the semester, she was very reserved, kind of standoffish, but I could tell that she was watching me like a hawk. I had applied to 5 PhD programs. I got 4 rejection letters right in a row. For a couple of weeks, I was sweating bullets. Looked like it was time for plan B. At one point, Blondie, I'm not going to use her real name, pulled me aside and asked, "Are you interested in some advice?" "Yes, please." She said, "Don't worry about it. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I know of a firm that would love to have you. If you're interested, I'd be more than happy to write a letter of recommendation. I was a little surprised. So like I said, she'd always been a little standoffish, starting to think that she didn't care for me much. I was really floored when she told me it was her firm. She was interested in hiring me, working with me. From that day forward, our relationship completely changed. She started being very assertive in offering advice and suggestions. She was the one who told me, "You're probably going to struggle to fit in academia. You need to keep your options open." And she kept in touch with me for several years after I headed off to do a PhD, making sure I didn't need a plan B. All total, there are 3 women among my mentors. I'm not telling you all this to show you how great I am. I didn't deserve or even earn their mentorship. It was a gift, an honor and privilege that they were willing to spend their precious time and energy to share with me their hard-earned wisdom. It's a debt that I can never repay. I feel obligated, honor-bound even. As those who came before me helped me, I feel the need to help those who've come after me. And because of those 3 ladies, I feel a particular obligation to help the next generation of women. Maybe it's one of the reasons why they chose to mentor me in the first place. But I don't. Because I can't. It's way too dangerous. It's my experience, all the women I've met in architecture, somewhere between 10 and 15% will turn on you the moment they see a benefit. Now, you can kind of predict who those women might be. I'll kind of leave that to your imagination. But even if you meet somebody talented, smart, cool, common sense, based even, are you willing to bet that they won't change over the next 20 years? When I was an undergrad, I knew a young lady. There was a pretty ugly incident. Her so-called friends at the time abandoned her. I was the only one who stepped up. After that incident, we became friends. She was an only child, so she started telling everyone I was the big brother she never had. I was senior, ahead of her. As I started to learn about mentorship, and I was being mentored, she became my first official protege. I went to grad school, she went to grad school. I went off to do a PhD. Not long after, she went off to do her own PhD. I was the shoulder she cried on and one of the first persons she came to celebrate the good times. I have credits in both her dissertation and her master's thesis. She's a very efficient person, so she graduated ahead of me, got a professorship. And then she was up for tenure about the time everything hit the fan with me. Blondie was right. I was always going to struggle to fit in academia. Part of it's a class thing. It was now politically dangerous to be associated with me, and my protege started to distance herself. She's now way too busy to talk, didn't have time to return phone calls, and you can forget about emails. And then she publicly denounced me, saying she had nothing to do with me. I ended up leaving my program, and she got tenure. Temporary and illusionary power. I never publicly commented on what she'd done. When you go from being a shield to nothing, silence becomes deafening. A couple years later, I get a phone call. She was upset and angry. She had discovered that certain doors were closed to her permanently. I might have been gone, but my mentors were still out there. Friends, people whose respect I'd earned, they were still out there. She was now persona non grata in certain quarters. She had a reputation for somebody who would stab a mentor in the back for personal gain. A traitor. Not a reputation you want in a field that is dependent upon mentorship. Implicit trust. She wanted me to talk to people, fix things. I asked, "Did you say?" "Yes, but." "Did you say?" "Yes." Now, I believe that part of being a mentor is the willingness to forgive mistakes. I told her, "You could fix our relationship. You could fix all of this all on your own without my help. Yes, but. Last thing I ever said to her, the person I met would despise the person I'm talking to. You've become what you hated. Temporary and illusionary power. A small percentage of women have been convinced to chase after temporary and illusionary power for immediate gain, ultimately damaging the profession as a whole. But here's the joke. It's all nothing but a scam. Most of these professors believe that all human interactions, including sex, are nothing more than assertions of power. And they're more than willing to use their positions of authority to assert their power. The proto-MeToo movement in academia, it had nothing to do with morality, justice, or protecting women. It was all about control and gatekeeping. If you're a member of the club in good standing, with the right attitude, the right worldview, the right politics, you can get caught in the act with your student by your wife. Have your wife divorce you, marry that student, and nothing's going to happen to you. In fact, the university will hire your new wife. But if you're not a member of the club, you don't have the right attitude, the right worldview, the right politics, you don't have to be guilty of anything. As far as academia is concerned, the right people, them, have the power. And they're willing to say or do whatever it takes to make sure that the right people, them, keep the power. If they damage an entire profession in the process, that's the price they're willing to pay to make sure that the right people, them, stay in power. And if they screw over women in the process, again, that's a price they're willing to pay to make sure the right people, them, stay in power. If they can convince a bunch of convenient dupes to do their dirty work for them, all the better. And if they can convince those same convenient dupes to kick over the ladder, making sure those said convenient dupes never become a threat to those in power, that's called a twofer. Architecture as a profession may be entering a death spiral. This is just one of multiple problems we are facing. If architecture does survive, women are going to be starting over. The gains they've made in the last 50 years, gone like dust in the wind. At any rate, I hope I've given you all something to think about. Until next time, you all be safe. If you're still here, why? But seriously, I really appreciate it. While you're at it, why don't you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell. You can hear me yammer on about something else next time.
Please like and subscribe. Please leave a comment.